I had a black friend in high school. I know, it's nothing special nowadays, but 30 years ago in a small town somewhere in Indiana, I was probably one of the very few white kids who had a black friend. I'm not going to name this friend by her real name, so let's just go with the name Zoe. Zoe was a good kid, but the situation she was forced in wasn't good for her. It wouldn't have been good for anyone. Zoe and her father arrived in our town by accident, and I mean that literally. We had two deputies die in a car accident one year, and the town needed replacement deputies as early as possible. From what I know, the replacement deputies were not chosen as they normally are, and they basically brought in two rookie officers who were available at the time. Mind you, our town was tiny, and we had maybe 5 African American families in all. None of those families had children, and from what I can remember, they were all elderly people. Put the two and two together, and you had a situation in which a lonely black girl would attend an all-white high school in a pretty much all-white town. Racism back then was subtle, at least in our town. People in our town never openly called someone by the N-word, nor did they look particularly uncomfortable sharing the same space with black folks. We had this big diner on the outskirts of the town. We'd see lots of truckers, random drivers, and people from other states stopping for gas and food. You would see people of all colors there, and not once we had any problem in the area, so all in all, things were good. For Zoe though, this wasn't a short trip to a scenic small town. This was the life she had to live every day. In school, she had no friends. Her subdued, shy personality didn't help with the matter, but it was mostly because kids just stayed away from her. Ooh, racism, right? Some of it, yes, but not entirely. We are creatures of habit. We gravitate towards the familiar, and it goes the same regardless of one's color or background. Back in the day, I wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom, and the first face I see in the mirror is a pasty white girl. Everywhere in the house, mom, dad, brothers, all white. Go outside, all neighbors, white. I live in Seattle now, and I see the same thing happen in this big city. My house is not too far from a local middle school, and you see that most white kids walk home with white kids. The same with Asians and Latinos, and the black kids as well. It's not a politically correct thing to say, but it's just the way the human brain is wired. But imagine the life of Zoe for a moment. Even if she wasn't a victim of some act of vicious racism, she had to endure the torture of going to school every day where no one talks to her or even acknowledges her existence. In some ways, it's just as harsh as outright racism. I wasn't much different from other kids. I'll be the first one to admit that I would have never spoken to Zoe if not for that one accident one summer. It was about 1 year after Zoe was transferred to our school. I was riding a bike back home, but that day I was running an hour late than usual because I had to pick up some flowers for mom from the market. I took a shortcut through a trail in a forest because if you can cope with the rough terrain, you can actually shave about 20 minutes off the trip. I rode this trail since I began to learn how to ride a bike, so I'm confidently speeding and weaving through the trail when a carcass of a dead raccoon throws off my balance and I fell on the ground hard. I let out a scream while I was falling, and Zoe must have heard me some distance ahead because she came running toward me to help. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I think I'm fine." It's what I said. But when I try to stand up, my ankle hurt like hell. "I can't carry both you and the bike, so why don't we leave the bicycle here and take you home first?" Zoe suggested, and I agreed. I used her shoulder as support, and she snaked her arms around my waist to help me balance. It took about an hour to get home, and we spoke a lot in that time. Everyone figured she was kinda awkward, but that wasn't it at all. It was just the perception that we had of her that kept her at bay. When we arrived at home, she left me by the door, running off without even giving me a chance to thank her. Some half an hour later, while my mom was about done wrapping my ankle with compression bandage, the bell rings and mom invited Zoe inside to thank her properly. It was only then that I found out that she left in such a hurry to bring back the bicycle for me before it was too dark outside. Mom cooked dinner for us. Zoe and I chatted for hours until her father came to pick her up at night in his cruiser. We became inseparable from that day, and Zoe slowly began to open up to my other friends as well. Life was finally starting to get better for Zoe, and for me as well, since she had such a positive influence on me, and now was a huge part of my life. Zoe was kind, giving, tolerant, and most of all, a loyal friend. I remember one time we were eagerly waiting for the premiere of Young Guns, and we were going to watch it together with some other friends. But then one day before the premiere, my dad drags me along with the whole family to his brother's in Michigan, and I missed out on the premiere. I remember on the drive back home, I was hoping the movie was so good that Zoe would want to watch it again with me. When I got home and met Zoe the next day, the first thing she told me was, "Let's go watch Young Guns," and she sounded so excited. I asked her, "Didn't you watch it with Amy and Tina already?" "No, dummy. I told them I was going to watch it with you and waited for you." Doesn't sound like a big deal, right? Well, believe it or not, Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, and that piece of turd Charlie Sheen were big hotties back then. Nowadays, you got the internet, cool video games, and you get pretty much everything instantaneously. But in the 80s, you had to wait patiently listening to the radio to record your favorite song on a cassette tape, get updates on your favorite movie stars reading magazines, and there were no instant gratification. Zoe was always like that. Even after she had more friends than just me, she continued to be my best friend through all the drama of high school kids. However, there was one thing that I found strange about her. These were rare, at least at first, but there were days when Zoe would completely shut down. She didn't want to talk, she didn't want to walk home together, and on those days, she seemed like a perfect stranger. As months went on, Zoe's strange behavior became the norm rather than the exception. I tried to find out what was happening to her, and one day, I ignored her request to let her walk home alone and asked why she behaved like that on certain days. Before walking away, she said to me, "If I tell you this, you might never want to talk to me again, but if I don't tell you, it might do the same, so I'll tell you. A curse runs in my family. My mom committed suicide because of it, so did her brother, some cousins, and many relatives long before our time. The night my mom killed herself, she told me a story in a hurry before she left the house for the last time. She said a long time ago, when all blacks were slaves, one of our ancestors was forced to beat another slave to death, one who was accused of killing the master's son. The accused slave was a healer of sort. She was never allowed to heal any white folks, but she was called upon whenever other slaves were hurt on the job or were beat too severely. One of the master's son got ill one day, and no white doctor could heal the child. Out of desperation, the master called upon the slave healer to help his son, but the healer told him it was too late for the boy. She did what she could for the boy, but he didn't survive the night, and the master blamed his son's death on the slave healer. The following day, my ancestor was ordered to beat the slave healer to death. He didn't want to, but he had no choice but to do as told. This ancestor had to hit a fellow slave until he bled from his knuckle and could hardly stand from the fatigue. Before the healer died, she cursed everyone in the plantation. Black or white, it didn't matter. She cursed everyone involved in her death to an eternity of sorrow and pain. That the curse will end only when the bloodlines cease to exist. After telling me the story, Zoe said, "There's an evil spirit that has haunted my family line for generations after the curse. This evil spirit can't stand us being happy, so it latches onto whoever is the happiest in our family and does not leave until that person's life is miserable or they end up killing themselves. That is why so many of my relatives have either committed suicide or have been sent to mental institutions. My time here with you has been the happiest time of my life, and the evil spirit has come back into my life to make it miserable again. That's why I never made friends. I kept to myself and pushed happiness away from my life, because I knew what would happen if I ever felt true happiness again. You have to stay away from me from now on. I love you like a sister, but it's become too burdensome for me to continue living with the evil spirit. Please don't ever speak to me again. Goodbye, Chloe. I stood where Zoe left me for a very long time, not because I was shocked by her story, but because my heart broke for Zoe. A month later, Zoe was found dead in her tub with her wrist slashed. She had killed herself like her mother did. I took the loss hard. Losing Zoe for me was no different than losing a blood sibling. It took 3 years of therapy to finally function normally again. In those 3 years, I kept seeing Zoe everywhere, and the psychiatrist explained it as me coping with the loss. I believed her. There was no reason to not believe her. I found normalcy again and was attending college. I had a boyfriend, new friends, grades were good, I felt good. Then one day, the visions of Zoe came back and it wouldn't stop. This time, the visions were more violent and felt more real. I would wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and become frightened to death at the reflection of Zoe crying tears of blood in the mirror. Sometimes I'd be at the library at night and I see bloody Zoe being dragged by some unknown entity. It was becoming too much to bear, so I voluntarily admitted myself into a mental institution. It wasn't one of those horrible institutions that were only slightly better than maximum security prisons. No, this was a nice place. It was expensive as hell, but thankfully my parents could afford it. In there, we had professionals who we could talk to anytime we wanted. The meals were good, the building was clean, and we even had a park in the back to take walks whenever we wanted. If I didn't get better there, then I was never getting better. As days become weeks and weeks became months, I began to realize that the visions of Zoe were not manufactured by my mind. They were real. Once I accepted the visions as being real, I then practiced how to look inconspicuous even when I'm having those visions. It was the perfect place to practice, make mistakes, and look crazy sometimes in perfecting my deception. When I felt confident of my ability to blend in with the rest of the society, I checked myself out with the consent of my parents and went back to living life as normally as all others around me. Today, I have 2 daughters of my own and a husband who still kisses me like he did on our second date. From outside looking in, my life is no different than any other person in the world, but the truth is, I still have visions of Zoe, and her suffering hasn't eased any over the years. I think she needs my help. She wants me to help her, but I have no clue how to do that. I feel guilty for befriending her and being the reason for her untimely death. For all you know, she could still be alive if we never became friends. I see Zoe suffering every day, and it kills me to know there's nothing I can do to save her from the torture. I miss Zoe so much. If there was anything I could do to help her.
What's all this sad poetry in your notebook, boy? I know you felt down, and it's good to get it out. Yeah, it's good to get it out. But these lines, they don't rhyme with the way that I know you are feeling will go. With a simple hello, with a smiling hello.